The World Economic Convergence Gala in Geneva had always been a high-profile event, but this year felt different. The air inside Unity Hall was tense, almost electric. Everyone in the room, from presidents to tech CEO, I knew something unusual was about to unfold. At the center of the buzz were two men, Elon Musk, the world's most recognized tech entrepreneur, and Ibrahim Traoré, the bold and fast-rising leader of Burkina Faso. Traoré had been making headlines for months with his outspoken criticism of Western involvement in African tech and resource infrastructure. And tonight, rumors were swirling that he planned to address Musk directly. No one knew exactly how, but the stage was set for a clash no one had predicted. The room itself was modern and sleek, filled with futuristic design and global flags, but the atmosphere didn't match the aesthetics. The conversations were tight-lipped, eyes darting from one corner to another, waiting for something to happen. Musk, calm and collected, had arrived without much attention. Dressed in his usual black-on-black style, he nodded politely to a few leaders and avoided the cameras. Traoré, by contrast, made an entrance that couldn't be missurrounded by security, advisors, and a sense of mission. He didn't smile. He didn't pause. He was there for a purpose. Traoré's team had been preparing quietly. This wasn't about theatrics. He had spoken in recent months about digital colonization and how African nations were being left out of major tech conversations while still being affected by them. His words had been sharp, but tonight he planned to take it a step further. His advisors were nervous. This wasn't the kind of place where political clashes usually happened. But Traoré wasn't worried. He believed someone had to say what everyone else avoided. Musk, for his part, wasn't unfamiliar with criticism. He'd taken punches from politicians, media outlets, and activists before, but he hadn't publicly engaged with African leadership. On these concerns, he didn't seem nervous, but he wasn't overly confident either. He understood the weight of the room and the significance of the man sitting just a few chairs away. As the evening went on, the two men remained silent but aware of each other. Then came the segment titled Global Innovation and Sovereignty. Both men were seated on the same panel. The moderator began his welcome, but people weren't listening. All eyes were on Musk and Traoré. The microphones were adjusted. The lights dimmed slightly, and just as the moderator asked the opening question, Traoré leaned forward, his voice steady, his words ready. It was clear to everyone, this was not going to be a normal panel discussion. Something real was about to happen. The room had already been on edge, but when Ibrahim Traoré finally spoke, the atmosphere turned sharp. He didn't start with greetings or small talk. Instead, he looked directly at Elon Musk and spoke with a tone that was calm but loaded. When asked about Africa's place in the future of global innovation, Traoré used the question not to celebrate progress, but to challenge power. He said clearly, Africa doesn't need saving. We need fair ground, because when satellites are sent over our heads and minerals are pulled from our lands without us in the room, it's not innovation, it's a modern version of control. People shifted in their seats. Musk didn't flinch, but his silence said a lot. Traoré went on, listing how Starlink had been activated in parts of West Africa without proper government consultation. He pointed to Tesla's resource channels, especially in regions like the Congo, where cobalt and lithium passed through layers of third-party deals, some of which lacked proper oversight. He wasn't throwing blame carelessly. He was building a case. Every sentence had weight. He wasn't raising his voice, but each word pressed harder than the last dot. Then came the line that hit the room like a dropped glass. You have more reach than most world leaders. Traoré said, but you weren't chosen by any people, so who are you really accountable to? It was a direct challenge not to Musk's business, but to his influence. The question didn't ask for data or explanation. It asked for reflection, and it made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Musk finally leaned forward. He didn't sound angry. His voice was steady as he said, that's a valid concern. But I think the way this is being framed is unfair. He explained that Starlink's early entries into African countries often came through local tech partnerships, not government channels, because many agencies were too slow or blocked by red tape. As for Tesla's mineral sourcing, he explained that every vendor was under review, and most contracts were made public. He spoke in terms of process and access. He even mentioned training centers his companies had funded in African nations. But Traoré wasn't talking about paperwork. He was talking about power. Connection doesn't mean inclusion, he replied. You build systems, you offer tools, but we don't get to shape them. You say you're helping, but we don't even get a seat at the table. Musk nodded slightly, but the gap in understanding was clear. The audience was now split. Some global leaders glanced at each other, visibly unsure. European delegates sat stiffly, careful not to seem too aligned with either side. A few African ministers nodded slowly, clearly resonating with what Traoré was saying. The dynamic had changed. This wasn't just a panel. It had become a stage for something deeper, questions of fairness, respect, and who really gets to define the future. Traoré then reached for a folder resting beside his chair. Without ceremony, he opened it and handed several papers to the moderator. "These are communications from our ministries to your Starlink team," he said, directing his words toward Musk. "We asked for meetings. We received silence." The moderator read from them messages, showing polite but unreturned emails, canceled calls, and eventually, no response at all. The message was clear. His government had been ignored. Musk, his hands now folded, responded, "That shouldn't have happened. I wasn't aware of these documents, but I'll follow up." His tone was genuine, but the weight of the moment had already tipped. This wasn't just a missed email, it was a symbol of being overlooked, and the crowd knew it. What stood out next was that Traoré didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just finished his thought. "We're not looking for favors. We're not begging. We want partnership, not platforms dropped from the sky. You build rockets for Mars. Mr. Musk, are partnerships on Earth really that difficult?" And with that, the moderator quietly moved to the next speaker, but no one in the audience was listening anymore. Every person there knew something had shifted. This wasn't just a conversation about tech. It had become a challenge about the future of respect between nations and the power of those who shape tomorrow without always asking who it affects. The silence in the hall lingered longer than anyone expected. After Traoré's bold challenge and the moderator's awkward shift to the next speaker, it felt like something was hanging in the air, unfinished. But then, Elon Musk moved. He tapped on his tablet and raised his hand slightly, signaling the moderator. "May I?" he asked. His voice was calm, clear, and without hesitation. "I think there's something we all need to see." The moderator gave a brief nod. Everyone turned toward the main screen as it flickered to life. What came next wasn't what people were used to seeing from Musk. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't flashy. It was controlled, factual, and oddly personal. The first slide read, "Africa, not forgotten, just misunderstood." Then came numbers, big ones. Musk explained how, over the last few years, his companies had invested more than $2.3 billion across 17 African countries. He spoke about solar energy programs, innovation, grants, Wi-Fi access in villages, and training centers. It wasn't a brag, it felt more like an answer, a quiet but firm one. He showed photos of schools lit by Tesla solar panels, medical clinics that no longer lost power during surgeries, and footage of rural areas connected through Starlink. The screen then cut to a short video clip from a small classroom in Burkina Faso. The quality wasn't polished. The lighting was dim, but the voice was clear. A young girl, maybe 12 years old, stood in front of a whiteboard and said in French, "Because of this power, I can study at night. I want to be an engineer like Elon Musk." There was a small pause in her voice. Her eyes looked directly at the camera. She smiled, then quickly looked down. That moment struck the room hard. Musk didn't speak right away after the video ended. He looked at the floor, blinked a few times, and then continued in a quieter voice. "This isn't marketing," he said. "It's not about image. This is the reason I do any of this." His next words caught everyone off guard. But President Traoré is right. We've built fast, sometimes without stopping to ask who should be involved. We've worked with developers and startups but not always with governments, and that's a mistake. The room went still again. He was no longer explaining. He was owning it. Leadership means speed, but it also means listening, he said. Then, almost as if he was revealing something he'd been working on privately, he showed another slide. It was titled, Pan-African Tech Sovereignty Charter. He explained the idea an open voluntary agreement for companies like his to sign. It would promise real partnership with African governments, shared planning, local hiring, and full transparency. It wasn't just a pitch. It looked like a blueprint. Traoré was watching closely now. He hadn't expected this. His folder of papers, his quiet challenge, all of it had been planned to hold Musk accountable. But this was something else. It was rare for someone like Musk to be questioned in public, and even rarer for him to answer like this. For a moment, the president didn't speak. His eyes moved between the screen and Musk. Musk didn't fill the silence. He just added, "You asked who I answer to. The truth is, I answer to the future I'm trying to help build. If that future doesn't include your voice, then it's broken. This charter is my step toward fixing that." Traoré finally stood. He didn't look angry or victorious. He looked thoughtful. His voice was low, steady. "If this is real, if this charter isn't just paper, then let's not sign it in private boardrooms. Let's do it where our people can see. Let's invite our engineers, our students, our communities to that table." Musk nodded without hesitation. Agreed. The moment didn't feel staged. There were no rehearsed lines, no flashy graphics. Just two men, standing across from each other, reaching a strange and unexpected middle. Cameras began to click, capturing the moment. But the real story was already clear. This wasn't just about one debate or one event. It was about how power responds to pressure, and what happens when someone chooses to listen instead of defend. People in the room didn't clap right away. They were still absorbing what they'd just witnessed. Two figures who had seemed destined to clash had instead opened the door to something new. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, more than anything else, gave the moment its weight. In the days that followed, the story traveled faster than anyone expected. News outlets around the world ran headlines that all pointed to the same surprising truth. What had started as a confrontation between President Traoré and Elon Musk had turned into something constructive. From showdown to framework. Read one tech titan humbled, read another. But the coverage didn't focus on drama. It focused on what came after the decisions, the commitments, and the strange but meaningful connection that had formed between two very different leaders. In Ouagadougou, standing behind a wooden podium outside a university tech center, Traoré addressed the press with a quiet confidence. He announced the creation of a new working group that would include representatives from Tesla, SpaceX, and African universities. It wasn't about flashy announcements or corporate deals. This isn't about money, he said. This is about dignity. It's about making sure that African voices are part of how the future is designed. The crowd didn't cheer, listened. The message was deeper than politics. Musk responded online the next day, using his usual direct tone. Proud to be working with President Traoré and the next generation of African builders. He posted, "Leadership means listening, action to follow." It was short, but the message was clear. He wasn't walking away. He was walking into something new, and this time, with others by his side. Some critics weren't convinced. A few Western commentators called it a public relations move. Others said it wouldn't last. But on the ground, change was already starting. Just weeks later, Tesla opened its first joint innovation hub in West Africa, focusing on engineering, training, and local hiring. SpaceX rolled out a new transparency dashboard that let countries track satellite use and request changes directly. Even global companies like Apple and Google took notice, releasing statements supporting shared tech standards and community-first strategies across Africa. Still, the real shift didn't show up in boardrooms, it showed up in classrooms. Across Burkina Faso, applications to science and engineering programs spiked. Young people who had once felt disconnected from global tech finally saw something different. They saw a leader who stood up without shouting, and a billionaire who listened without defending. They saw respect, and it made them believe they could be part of the story too. 6 months later, Traoré and Musk sat on stage, again this time as part of a student-led panel in Accra. The room was full of young engineers and innovators. There were no bodyguards, no bright lights, just questions and answers. Musk looked out at the crowd and said, "It's easy to build rockets, but trust it takes more work." Traoré, seated beside him, nodded and added, "Sometimes you need pressure to know if someone's really paying attention." And that was the point. This hadn't just been about policy or investment. It was about how two powerful people chose to handle disagreement with honesty, with responsibility, and with the willingness to shift. As the panel ended and the crowd stood to applaud, it became clear this wasn't just one story among many. It was a reminder that even in a world full of tension, real change is still possible when people choose to hear each other, instead of fight to be heard.